Our first speaker today is Daniel Donahoo. Daniel's a researcher and producer who works at the intersection of play, technology and learning. And he's a very, very highly experienced presenter, and he enjoys working with technology, but he's also worked with the digital policy group that developed Australia's statement on young children and digital technologies. So I'd like to welcome Daniel on behalf of DLTV and ACHPER. And I'm looking forward to this exciting speech, his exciting presentation today, learning. And he's a very, very highly experienced presenter, and he enjoys working with technology, but he's also worked with the digital policy group that developed Australia's statement on young children and digital technologies. So I'd like to welcome Daniel on behalf of DLTV and ACHPER, and I'm looking forward to this exciting speech, his exciting presentation today.
How are you going, everyone? Thank you for that kind introduction, Daryl. That is very generous of you. I have spent a lot of time hanging around technology. I'm early childhood trained, so I come out of a space of play and experiential learning and the constructivist approach. And we're going to bring that today to some things that I've been doing and some work that I do, I guess, in relation to health and well-being. So what I wanted to start with is actually a quote from an author that I'm really a big fan of, Haruki Murakami, and he's a Japanese author, novelist. The reason I like him is that he has spent most of the last 40 years, his routine is to get up every morning and go for a run. Running is a pretty big thing in Japan. They have all sorts of things like these Ekiden relays and company-sponsored running teams, and he has a book called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. I highly recommend it, even if you're not a runner, as I am. And he says in that book, I just run. I run in void. Or maybe I should put it another way. I run in order to acquire a void. And there's many people who engage in sport and physical activity and those kinds of things who do sport for a similar kind of reason. It's to find a space outside of busyness and the hecticness that seems to operate in our minds. It's well documented in research that doing those kinds of things, whether it be something passive like a meditation or a yoga type experience, through to the people that go and do their, whatever it is, HIIT 45 hardcore workout kind of stuff. These things actually are not just good for our physical health, but they are good for our mental health. And I would posit that it's not just those types of activities that allow us to do that. That is a flow state that we are getting into that takes us out of ourselves, that takes us to a place where time, stands still in a way and we're not sort of aware of it. It can happen when somebody's out for an afternoon in the garden digging a hole or doing those kinds of things. But it also happens in places like video games. And the greatest example of that is when any parent who has a child or a young person who plays video games says, you've had an hour, it's time to get off the video game. The child will say, no, I haven't. And actually both those things are true at the same time, because for the adult, that time has passed. But often for the young person playing a video game, they're so immersed in what they are doing that they've found themselves in a flow state where time has just stood still. And for many of them, they are just like Haruki Murakami, are running into a void. They're looking for a space where they can just be and not have to worry about homework or whatever it is and all those other sorts of things. Now, of course, these things can be taken to excess, and we need to keep an eye on those sorts of things. But I put that there to sort of suggest that sometimes we look at things like technology, health and well-being, the natural world, and we posit that these things are sort of against each other, that they're either one or the other. And I suggest that they're actually not. And so there are three particular things that I'm wanting to talk to you about today. The first one of those is around breaking assumptions. I find it really interesting and important for us to sort of unpack a little bit what our assumptions are and around technology and how we use it and what that actually means for us. I want to talk a little bit about strategies and approaches that people can use within their teaching and within their practice to actually bring a more sort of healthy and well-being approach to the use of technology and supporting students with that. And I want to tell you a story about a project that I've been involved in the last 3 years that is called Digital Compass. It's a project that's still a trial, but effectively it is something that is looking at supporting young people, particularly sort of year 9 and 10 age group, with their technology use, and looking at how they can actually use it to actually have better for their health and for their well-being and their whole round being. So, breaking assumptions. The first assumption that I want to sort of take you to is this broad-ranging sort of groupthink that we now have, which is the idea that screens are bad, that screen time is a bad thing. And not only is that sort of like no longer true, because all of us are carrying these around in our pockets and using them all the time, and we're sitting in front of screens at the moment as we speak, engaging with this content and trying to learn and all of those kinds of things. And you can talk pandemics and all the rest of it. But the thing is, screen time as being a bad thing was actually never true. It possibly comes out of, like I've just said before, that sort of dichotomy behind the sort of idea that running is good, swimming is good, sitting down, looking at a computer screen is bad, and that dichotomy just doesn't necessarily hold. And the way I want you to think about that is to think about the history of screen time and where did this come from. Now, in 1992, well, actually in the 80s, researchers began to look at it and explore television and all the rest of it, and a few researchers and artists did a range of different work where they would put cameras behind televisions and take photographs of young children's faces in situations where you may have seen before, where the children are just in a stark black background and you just get the sort of radiated screen looking at them and they look like they're staring and sort of zombie-like. And those sorts of images began a process where people started to question what's going on here when we're watching television. What is all this about? And in 1992, the American Association of Pediatricians, for the first time, came up with their media policy, their health and media policy, and the core platform of that policy was a term screen time, and the idea that children under the age of 2 should not spend any time in front of a screen. They were sort of addressing that idea that young children would be sat in bassinets in front of televisions to keep them entertained. And we know this sort of thing because what happened was their policy basically became adopted by a whole range of other people in Canada and the UK and across the Western world and Australia and our Department of Health. It was easy for us to go, well, the American Association of Pediatricians have done the work. That's their policy. No screens for children under the age of 2, half an hour for those between the ages of 2 and 4, 1 hour for children up to the age of 6. No child under the age of 18, according to their policy, should have had more than 2 hours of screen time a day. Back in 1992, screen time was a television. It was a television that was often in a corner. There's usually only one in a house. There might be 2 in a house. There might be like a black and white one sitting on mum and dad's dresser in the bedroom where they would watch a movie at night or something like that. But essentially, that policy stayed the same for near on 2 decades. And it wasn't that it wasn't looked at, it kept being reviewed. The sort of their subcommittee or whatever that looked at this sort of stuff would look at it, and televisions got bigger, screens appeared on desks and laptops and computers and all the rest of it. And then suddenly these things appeared. And that was still, even up into 2014, we were still at this case where they still held to that policy and that idea. And that's permeated across the world, and that set the tone for the idea that screens are bad. And what that also meant was that if you were a person who was studying anything at university, whether you were studying young children or whether you were studying, the effects of media and watching screens on children and young people, you couldn't do that because no academic, no institution would allow you to get through ethics, because you wouldn't be able to do that on a large scale with children, because the American Association of Pediatricians policy was that you actually, it was bad for children, that children under 2 shouldn't see more than half an hour. So you actually couldn't do the research. So we get to a stage, 2014, where there's very little research on what it is for children to learn and experience and have healthy technology use when they're carrying their own smartphones around. There's been a dearth, a vacuum left by that policy. And we have the American Association of Pediatricians finally listening to people and going, oh, maybe we need to revisit this. Maybe there's something more to this thing now that there's, 10 screens in a house and we're carrying them around in our pockets. And in doing that, they looked at it, they looked at all the research, and they came up with a thing where they said, basically, we're looking at it now and we've decided that the, Hippocratic oath that we apply to, which is do no harm, that idea that we have no evidence, therefore we should just do nothing, should no longer apply. And they effectively wrote to say, well, in 1992, we didn't have evidence that screens were bad. We just didn't know. So we decided it was best that you didn't watch screens, and we put that policy in place. Now, it has huge ramifications that no one's really unpacked or explored. But what it is to say is that we're now at a point where we're trying to actually work out, how do we make technology, how do we use screens in ways that are healthy and that are beneficial and useful, and what does that look like? How long should you watch a screen for before you get up and move? How should I sit in front of a screen? What impact does it have on my my physical space, whether I'm holding a controller, or all of those kinds of things? And that's a space that a lot of researchers that I've been working with are now trying to explore and unpack. The other sort of second assumption I want to challenge is that idea that phones are bad. Ultimately, this is a story about the dangers of the moral panic. And it's not that necessarily phones are ridiculously great, or that they actually have any specific purpose towards supporting our health and well-being, except to say that when we just go, phones are unhealthy or phones are bad, we simplify a problem that is far more complex than we want to recognize. And in doing that, we therefore simplify the solution. And so the solution is to say, no phones at school. The solution is to say, reduce the amount of screen time. The solution is to say, these are not good things. The solution is to say, we should demonize young people for the fact that they're using phones so much, and yet they are using them no more really than adults do, and how much we rely on them. And so we place blame on this behavior on children and young people, or on parents, or on teachers that aren't able to manage the technology properly, when indeed the technology itself is specifically designed to hold your attention. The technology is designed to make money by showing people advertising effectively. It's no different to television in that way. And so therefore the way Facebook and all the social media companies sort of design these things is so that people actually have to, feel compelled. And it deals with our neurology and the way we think and engage and behave. So, moral panics have come and gone before. Violent video games. In the 80s, it was Dungeons and Dragons, which is now lauded and seen as a wonderful thing, thanks to Stranger Things. In the 60s, it was rock and roll. Before that, right at the turn of the previous century, it was around telephones, the fact that people would sort of stop leaving their house because they could talk to each other on telephones. None of these things actually come to pass, and all they actually do is impact on our ability to use these things in really positive and constructive ways, which is how we should be thinking about technology. How does technology support us to enact behavior change? How are we using our meditation apps? What are those kinds of things like Couch to 5K apps that get people up and running again? How do we use technology in ways that do support us to be healthy? And the idea that technology is something that always negatively impacts health. And again, I think this is when we've refused to see the complexity. Obviously, health and technology are deeply intertwined, especially when you look at medicine, when you look at contemporary approaches to surgery, but also when you look at sport and how we go about, analysing and looking at the way professional sports people, undertake their activity, when we're tracking all of our data, when we've got these watches on our hands that tell us our heart rate and blood pressure, whatever else it is that they're sort of communicating to us. So we make a whole range of assumptions around technology and our health and our well-being that I think are important to sort of schism from time to time. When we do that, that allows us to actually approach the second thing that I want to talk about, which is our strategies and approaches in really different ways. The first thing that I sort of want to talk about in terms of strategies and approaches is that really we are at a stage. And I know, we're talking at a time where I know there's a bunch of people that are at EduTech and looking at technology and education. And I know one of the core messages that's coming out of that conference is what I've got here, which is that deficit models to technology are out. The whole idea of block, turn it off, spend less time, that doesn't hold anymore. And even that concept of, online safety is a deficit model. It's always just about looking at technology in terms of just safety, doesn't recognize the whole breadth of digital well-being. And actually, I'm in a world as a young person or as a student where technology exists. So how do I support myself to exist in that space with all of that technology? And if we are working in spaces of health and physical education and supporting that holistic sort of body-mind piece of the human being, then just sort of saying block, turn off, less time doesn't work. We should be interested in saying we're not going to put the technology elephant back into the box. We've got to find ways to support students to live with that. And the question is, how well are we doing that at the moment? So what that means is that strength-based models are in. That's the strategy and approach that we need to take. You know, we need to support our students through lessons and through plans and through ways of going about things that help us to say, well, how do you know that you're using technology positively? How are you going to reduce the negative impact that it has on your lives? What's the approach that you're going to bring to look at the data and the evidence that says this is beneficial and useful for me, and this is not useful for me? So if I do this with my phone, it's great. If I do this with my phone, it's not so great. You know, looking more broadly at my life, what are the other things that aren't just technology? So a strengths-based approach to technology is probably saying, don't just say how much time you're spending using your tech. It's about saying how much time are you sleeping? How much time are you doing physical exercise? What are you actually eating? And what we don't ever do within the discussions around digital technology and health and wellbeing is say, well, where does digital technology fit within that broader sphere? You know, what's that look like and how do we do that? And we also know, therefore, that in terms of strategies and approaches, young people in some of the work I've been doing have been talking to us and saying, well, scenarios and specific advice isn't as useful because there are so many different apps. There are so many different ways that technology is used. There's so many different ways that young people adapt and evolve and change to this. Means that what they're looking for is more a critical thinking approach. They need to be supported to be able to adapt and work with the situation that they actually have. It's about giving them an ethics and a values base to actually then analyze their own space, their own behaviours and what they're doing and how that's impacting on their life, and supporting them to develop the skills and capacity to actually change that. Digital Compass is a project that I've worked on for about 3 years with, it was funded by the Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation and run through the Behavioural Insights team, which is a consultancy in Sydney, and supported by the Alana and Madeline Foundation. And the process there was to actually say, well, technology is a big part of young people's lives and we're perceiving this as something that actually they need help and support with, that it's sometimes having a range of negative effects. How can we actually do that? And the Behavioural Insights team is interested in behaviour change, and they're interested in doing that through making small nudges, you know, rather than coming in and saying, right, you have to completely transform your life. They're just saying, what are the small little bits that we have some control over that we can pull the levers of? And so I worked with them to sort of develop up an educational program that we then piloted and trialled in a range of different schools in a range of different ways. We did a one-day model where we had 7 or 8 facilitators working with a whole year level group. We did one which was sort of like a 3-session over 9 weeks, where every 3 weeks you would do a session, then have activities to do in between. We did a weekly, you know, once every 8 weeks. And the whole purpose of doing all of those was to see if what we had designed and what we were trying to do would work out. And effectively, the program on all of those, no matter how we timed it, was about saying, let's actually look at this and changing your behaviours through an ethical framework first. So what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be kind and look after yourself and others in a digitally saturated world? And we had a bit of an ethical framework that was pretty simple, with 4 key points about how you would actually go about doing that. And we sort of helped through different activities support students to explore that. That would lead to a whole range of discussions that were not just about their own health, but around prejudice and sexting and image-based abuse and all of those kinds of issues that are very current for young teenagers today. And we also got them to analyse their own data. So they got their phones, or they did some self-assessment, and they made had some sort of, you know, looked at what they'd actually done. So, you know, it was a case of going, Digital Compass is about technology and it's about ethics and it's about data that leads to behaviour change that hopefully contributes to a healthier, you know, a life and better wellbeing. And the first thing we did in any of these sessions, when the young people would first come in, they would come in and they would, we would just have a big piece of paper up, and I would say, look, what I want you to do is write on that piece of paper what parents actually tell you about technology, and what are the things that you hear or the adult world tells you about technology. And of course, you have all the kinds of things that young people, when given the freedom to just write something up on a piece of paper, are there. But then there were also within that a whole range of other things, which was phrases like "give us a break," things like "we do actually socialise," things that they say. Parents tell us they want us to live without our phones, but can they live without their phones? It was a real sort of indication that young people today, have a certain experience where basically their experience of technology and the way they're perceived around their use of it is quite negative. Then we had this situation, and I'm going to talk about one Year 9 class, but this actually stretched across a number of different classes. And in collecting the data, we asked a whole range of questions for self-assessments around sleep, around the food that they ate, and all of those kinds of things. And what became very clear was that for young people, sleep and distraction is this massive issue. What we would do is we'd collect their data. They would use their phones to fill out some forms and all the rest of it, and then we would be able to collate it and share back with them the sort of their own data, but also compared to the increasing massive data that we had on young people. And one of the questions that we had was, I stay up later than I mean to because I was using technology. And they were rating themselves on a scale from never up to often, so never, sometimes, always, rarely, and often. And pretty much consistently across all Year 9 students that completed this, was that around 3 out of 4 of them would say that, often, sometimes, or always, they were staying up later because they were using technology. And that was really interesting for them to look back on, because sometimes that they thought it was just them, but actually it becomes a stark sort of realization that they actually see. And then we had a situation, and this happened not in all schools, but in quite a few schools, where we asked if they had trouble falling asleep, and they had to say it takes me 0 to 15 minutes to get to sleep, or 15 to 30 minutes, or up to 45 minutes, or 60 minutes, or more than 60 minutes. And what was really stark, there were a number of schools where, and it was always consistent, boys always found it easier to get to sleep than girls did. And in a lot of schools, we had a situation where it was taking some young women more than 40 to 50% of young women in a year level taking more than 60 minutes to get to sleep. And whenever you presented that to them, it was really like, whoa, you could hear a pin drop too. You realize that this wasn't a discussion that these young people were actually having together, but that allowed us to create a space for a conversation and talk about that. And what was very clear is that mobile phones in the bedrooms and texting each other, and the social ramifications about being a Year 9 student, or a Year 9, particularly a Year 9 girl at that height of that social sort of space, means that it was very difficult to just say, well, just block, or just put the phone down, or just, because you can't afford to. You need to know what you're going to be walking into in the school gate at 8:30 in the morning, and you need to know what people are saying and what's going on. So the thing that they were able to unpack that was actually causing them to not get to sleep was the fact that the notifications kept going off on the phone or the tablet device, and they needed to respond to those. And in any behaviour change, showing young people that that's, anyone who you're trying to change their behaviour, sort of highlighting their behaviour back to them as one key way to actually start to do that. So what also we found was that also quite a few people, the young people also identified that quite a high percentage of them were also finding it hard to get back to sleep because they'd wake up during the night and then not get back to sleep. And again, in those sorts of discussions, it was the fact of, if they did wake up for whatever the reason, the first thing that they would turn to is their technology that was in their bedroom. It's one of the reasons why increasingly now in all of that sort of, in all of the dialogue we should be saying is don't allow technology in children's bedrooms, because as soon as it's in the bedroom, it's very hard to get it back out again. We actually designed all of these cards that we did in partnership with students that allowed them to sort of grapple with those issues. So we had things like struggling to connect with your family, and we had some data about what we know, and then we would have tips and tricks about how they could use that. And we supported them to use these cards because then they would develop their own behaviour plans. And those behaviour plans would lead to a whole range of things. Like I saw groups of young women deciding to keep each other accountable in their behaviour change plans, which were all linked to unfollowing people on Instagram that didn't make them feel good about themselves and that gave them negative ideas about their body and their body image. We saw young people identifying ways that they could talk and play video games that are more respectful, and doing a lot of comparison between video games and the way they behave there and the way that they behaved on, say, the football field or the basketball court or the netball court. We had students deciding by themselves to actively download and use meditation apps, or change the way they had notifications set on their phone, or to, set an alarm so that they would drink water more often, to help manage their study and exercise. And like I've said, it was deeply revealing around sleep. So Digital Compass is an example of something that's really got me thinking a lot about how, particularly in that high school space, we begin to talk and unpack and support students in their technology use, and how we do that to support their health and well-being. So that's the sort of key message that I wanted to bring today, which was to say, it's not enough really, and young people are telling us in the work I've been doing, it's not enough to say, just turn it off, just don't use it. We need to find ways to support them to develop better habits. And what are those habits going to look like? And how do we undertake that kind of work? It requires self-reflection. It requires a whole range of rather sophisticated skills. And a program like Digital Compass is one that's going to hopefully, set a bit of a foundation for improving educators' practice in how we do that.
Thanks for getting us off to a great start there, Daniel. I've put my phone down. I've tried to be present despite lots of notifications coming through from emails and work requests, but I'm all here now. Really speaking our language. I'm hearing words like strength-based, critical thinking, physical movement, well-being. And I think we're poised in a really great position here to have some experts, the people who are keen, those people who do probably go out for runs. We've got the great support here of Jessica and Andy at a local primary school, and they're going to get us off to a great start and talk about that positive use of technology, what it looks like in PE, and how that can be used, of course, to enhance well-being. Because as we move, we know the benefits of movement. We've got that increased dopamine, that lowered cortisol. We've got those teamwork, collaborative skills. We've got that better sleep, the better attention, the increased academic outcomes. So it's fantastic that COVID, unfortunately, through COVID, has allowed people to explore some great uses of technology to really facilitate well-being in a movement sense. And these people who are going to talk today have been really proactive and creative to explore, when we've been lumped with lockdown and we haven't been able to move, how can we connect using that technology and bring that physical activity back to life? So I'm going to actually handball it straight across to Jessica and Andy, and they're going to share some ways that they've embedded technology positively in their PE program to help well-being, and then we'll pass over to Daniel after.
Thanks for that introduction, Joe. Hopefully everyone can hear us okay. As you said before, we really enjoyed exploring technology when we were online, and we're just always trying to find different ways to try and engage the children as much as possible. As we knew that some of them were just learning by themselves in the room. So we thought, how can we make this a bit more exciting for them? We noticed when we returned back to school as well, that the children were quite reliant, I guess, still on the use of technology and maybe a little bit nervous to participate in certain things. So we tried to use PE further into our teaching as well. We also don't have a lot of undercover space at our school. So it was a very wet term too. So we found that we were in the classroom quite a lot. So just to bring a bit of creativity and keep the kids active, we had to look into some different ways. So I'm just going to start by sharing a video of some of the examples that we used at school last term. that was just a bit of preview of some of the things that we learnt that we used while we were at school. So now I also have another PowerPoint presentation, which hopefully we're going to be able to get up to, that just goes through some of the different apps as well that we used from that video there.
I think while you're doing that, Jessica,
Thanks,
just
Jo.
looking at all the students' faces was just that positive well-being. They're socially connected, they're emotionally connected, their mental well-being is just, they just look so happy. It looks so much fun.
Yeah, the children absolutely loved it, especially some of the children that we find get a little bit nervous in some of the big team games and running activities. They were sort of really taking ownership of a lot of the activities. We found with 6-year-olds being able to pick up the iPads, they're able to organize themselves into the games and organize it all themselves, separate the different teams. So yeah, it's been, there's some really good programs that we can use. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the different apps that we find quite popular at our school with our children. And what they've really enjoyed to keep active when maybe we don't have a big space, and bringing back after lockdown. So from the video, we had lots of clips of the Blaze Pods. So the Blaze Pods look at reaction time, looking at physical exercise, and doing some group different activities. So the Blaze Pods light up with different color cues. We can do almost anything with it. In the little GIF that we've got attached, at the moment, the children are playing a game of Rob the Nest, so we don't need to have lots of equipment here, don't need to worry about things blowing away. The children can just go backwards and forwards and tap the lights to knock them out. So we started looking quite a lot into the whole Blaze Pods things because we noticed that we can do it for lots of different things, whether or not it was fitness tasks or group activities or sports activities as well. So using sports equipment and touching the Blaze Pods. So we're really interested in this, and the kids absolutely love these. So this is what I mean by in terms of the kids being able to organize and set themselves up. We can set up lots of different stations. The kids grab their own grab the iPads. They can log into the program, set themselves up, and time each other, and then swap over and challenge each other. So you can see there's lots of happy faces and lots of moving backwards and forwards. We also have as well, the Blaze Pods have been aligned to the Australian curriculum. So there's lots of different examples of how you can use that in your PE classes to make sure that you're really crossing off those links. And we also do have opportunities for a bit of a discount on buying them because they are, I guess, a little bit expensive, but they do last a long time and you can do a lot with them. So here are some of the other apps that we have been using and found quite handy. Toca Dance is a app where children can create their own character and then create their own dance with the character. So just moving their arms, their heads, they create a bit of a dance, and then we get the children to perform the dances after. A big one that we used in term 2 was our jumper app. We do the Jump Rope for Heart program, so we do lots of skipping, particularly at a prep year 1, year 2 level. We find it, I guess, quite challenging as the children are starting to learn how to skip with the skipping rope. Some get a little bit frustrated and maybe don't have all that success and then just don't want to do it. So they're not overly active, I guess, always in that class time. So this app has a virtual skipping rope. So it means that the children are jumping even if they can't turn the rope. So we noticed that they started to create a little bit more rhythm with the skipping rope too, being able to turn it around. But even if they didn't have a skipping rope, they were able to stay active and just try and get in as many jumps as possible. So that one was a really, really good find and something that the children really enjoyed doing. Bit Breaker, little bit like an old school computer game tennis approach where the ball, the children have to use their body weight to try and capture a ball. Which, the children absolutely love this one because they can go up through different levels, trying to knock down as many as they can and trying to keep the ball afloat. So that one was very popular. The home court basketball training, that one was really good when we were online and also when we've been back. Just helps children with reaction time and trying to aim to get a target. We've got the Blaze Pods there. The AR runner was looking at augmented reality as the children use the iPads to try and get particular targets. The workout producer was pretty cool as well. It gives the children an opportunity to choose some different fitness activities that they can use to create their own workout, teaches the children how to do each activity, records them doing the activity, and then they can put it to music. So then they had their own little fitness workout, which we've collected quite a few and really enjoyed showing when we were online learning. Are all about the gifts and making making pictures sort of come to life, I guess, especially when we're online learning. And some of the others that you can just have a look at have been quite handy. We found too our house cross country is quite technical now as well. So we filmed the course using a 3D view online, which was pretty cool. And then we got the GoPro around as well. So we're recording all the movements. So the children had a practice turn, but they could have a look at it at home and just really visualize where they were running. And then we just set up a Strava so they could track the exact course as well. And then here are some other examples of some things that we were using. So, for example, with our athletics, when we're teaching high jump and some of the other events, we set up a video delay. So once the children have a turn at the event, they can come and have a look at their technique, and we can talk about maybe what they did well and things that they need to work on. We've had some fun with some green screens. So I just got some green screens from eBay for I think they're only about $10, $15, and some props so the children can do in health, probably particularly, come up with some little acts using the green screen. The kids really enjoy that and can use the iPads to film themselves and organize themselves. We use some GIFs as well to show some of our station work, and we've become quite a fan of QR codes as well. We've just really found that the children just love just the different challenges and are really capable of doing all the different, using all the different products. Especially, as I said earlier, some of the children that we might not have engaging in some of the big sports are able to take ownership and leadership in different areas and explain different things to their friends. But they've just really enjoyed all the challenges that technology bring and the way that we can still keep everyone active whilst using the different products.
Yeah. Excuse me. That's fantastic, Jessica and Andy, and I know you're doing great things out at your school, and I think it's just worthy of clarifying again that you're using technology with a really clear purpose, and the purpose are linked to the curriculum outcomes. So you've got really clear uses. So what you're doing is you're using technology to support, not replace your PE program. And then what's happening is they're moving more because they're engaged. And then we're having those improved well-being outcomes because they're having fun, they're enjoying PE, they want to connect, they want to be there. And that's obviously a role of us as educators for that lifelong physical activity engagement. So really great uses there for bringing in that technology. And I know you've mentioned a few times that really great when you were virtual learning. I bet those tools are certainly carrying on being really handy and engaging. So continue to do what you're doing there, and certainly once you get more and more, please do share, because teachers who are listening in will really benefit from the sharings that you've given us this afternoon. Thank you. I guess we're going to talk about how you've really used technology to more so enhance that well-being and that physical activity levels and keep it up when we were online, but not to say that the purpose was only suitable during the online learning, because we can still use what you're doing today as well, which is great. So tell us what you've been up to.
Well, as sort of been mentioned, the lockdown years as such, we're challenging, and hearing some great things from the other schools and from other ideas of how we actually can engage technology. But the way I sort of looked at it, the challenges we had with lockdowns and remote learning, I like to sort of think of it as an opportunity to really experiment and explore how we can really support our students and their families, particularly as we began to learn the effect of our lockdowns on the wider community, and the schools was almost actual responsibility, and really to help the families out for the best of the students, let alone them as well. So, and so over those last few years, I was in charge of our local network of physical education sport teachers out here for school sport in the Knox area. And together as a collective, we got together as a PE teacher collective to develop a number of activities that one was a school-based, and then some were network-based, to engage the students themselves in the activities, staff, but then also the broader family connections, family and friends, to help build that connections back into the school environment and support for the kids and families, particularly as we're coming out of lockdowns, going back into the school setting, to help transition a bit more smoothly. So there's a few little things I just want to show, some of the things we did for our events that we actually ran. I utilised a lot of Google Sites, creating a few websites, and found that really easy to engage the students on their Google Drives and their Google Classrooms, but also being able to connect that with the parents and families of our community. But then also communicating that again to the other schools and their communities as well, because it's a nice, easy medium. But also learning through trial and error originally, and then getting the coding behind that with the Google Sheets. Good for my own professional development and for my team that helped me develop a number of things. So I'll share a couple little points. First off, a few little events that we did. Now, this was actually a virtual Olympics of our network. And we had a network of 32 schools. We had not all of them chose to participate, though we had 25 actually participate in the event. And this was just the base engagement numbers we had from the online. Now, I'll share the website shortly, but the event itself tried to engage students back at home and their families back at home into a quick, short, sharp physical activity, something where they could work as a team at home to help build that social and welfare connection, but also they could work with their friends online to actually achieve some goals. So you can see here on the left, we've got, in the right, the engagement by sessions on the left and the engagement by event on the right. And it shows you the number of engagements we had across each event. You can see some were quite popular, others not so much. But again, it tried to speak to the diverse nature of students and their interests across the gamut of the event. Now, the event itself went for 2.5 weeks, coinciding with the Olympic Games last year. And we ended up in the end with a total of just over 5,600 students involved across our network. Now, that could have been a singular engagement, that could have been multiple engagements from those students. But the thing we were looking at as physical education teachers and schools, even principals getting on board, was the children actually getting involved, not sitting at home doing nothing, actually building a connection, looking for connection, and getting involved with something that for them is part of a school building exercise, a school connectedness exercise, and then also encouraging physical education and health and wellbeing at the same time. And just because some of these events had finished and closed and our virtual medals were awarded, they were still open for students to continue to do for fun in their own time. So quite a large number of engagements right across the board, and the number of students involved, which was amazing. Really, really happy with the level of connection, which was great. Now, if I can actually show the website, that would be amazing.
Yeah, Daniel, maybe you could, did you, when you were collecting that data, how did you get the students to submit their results? Did you do that all through a Google form?
You did do it through a Google form. I'd set up a number of Google forms per the events, and the students would provide the website and they would input their results. That would automatically come through. Myself and a couple of the teachers were able to connect together to work on the result management, because as you saw by the amount of kids that were coming through, there was a lot. We had to sift through, not only do our own work, but make sure we're getting the results in the right space. Really good to have some people who knew their Excel and Google Sheet coding in the background to help filter things around, which was really helpful. Really, really helpful indeed. But from that, it was just great to be able to see those kids get involved. We had videos and photos coming through, just showing that online engagement. Here we go. I've got the website now. It wasn't working before, and now it is. So this is what the website that we that was developed. Here we go. So this was our Knox Virtual Olympics website, just made on Google Sites, which is really, really easy. We had our medal tally. You can choose your events, a little message, and a bit of a learning of the basics about how to actually utilize the website, a bit of a handy help center as well. So the kids were simply coming in, they would either check the medal tally, or they go into that, and they would check where their schools were sitting, and all the displays were published Google Sheets embedded into the website. So you can see the amount of golds, silver and bronze from the schools that were engaged, which is really, really good. Our basic section just simply told a little bit of things about how you can get support from your PE coordinators. And then you had the events. And they're all released in stages. So we'd only give a small amount of events per 3 to 4 days that the kids would be able to participate in to maximize them, and then close and then move to the next. So you can see from here, even some of the funny little pictures some of the kids were choosing to add on here as well. Different versions of different things, little fun takes on Olympic sports. As we sort of went through the whole program, right through to a big team decathlon at the end, which was pretty cool. So when you click on the event, it would take the students to a video where it would actually show the students the various components of the sport. Now, you've seen the team decathlon. What I really liked about this was, and we spoke about welfare and connection for students and families, but this is a real welfare and connection point for the physical education teachers in the network who weren't in their schools working with their kids and needed that sense of connection. A lot of them are in schools that they're the only physical education teacher, and by doing this together, it really helped build that sense of community within the cohort of professionals and help a number of them really with their personal well-being and sense of self and accomplishment within the lockdown period. So you can see with the decathlon, all these little mini videos that the teachers had made through varying programs were added as part of our team decathlon, and then the kids could go down to the end of the results and then see the results down there at the bottom. This was actually a lot of fun, a heap of fun to be able to do. And then at the end, obviously, the kids can download their own little medal, which again was developed by another teacher. Really fun to do. The staff engaged with it. It was really meaningful. Schools got behind it. The students loved it, and couldn't be more happy with the end result with our virtual Olympics from last year. But it just showed the value of really having a targeted use for technology within the system, but also trying to make it inclusive and really promote the ownership between the teachers, which would help them promote it through to the families and getting the students involved. I don't have the website up for the other one, but that I did with my own school the year before. But with that one, all the videos were made by the students. It was an internal school one, and all our school captains and house captains would meet with me twice a week online, and they would actually make the videos, and we would publish them through our little website, and we would go through that one there.
Is there going to be a 2022 Olympics, virtual Olympics?
We did think about doing sort of the old Com Games sort of version of that, but we're looking to diversify into something else to tip our hat into another adventure. And the one we were talking about working a little bit more was our virtual library, which we began last year, again as another Google site to help promote active engagement at home, but also to provide parents with tools to support their kids' health and well-being. So that was really, really important. We began that base phase, but also would come back for teachers and staff so they could actually utilize the site if they wanted a quick idea of games and activities, but also get class teachers involved in the health and physical education movement as well to help build them in. So I'll pop that up. It's still a work in progress. It is a very, very big site.
I think, Daniel, you've put so much work into that, and again, such a positive use of technology, which I really like what you said. It didn't only bring together your school community, it brought together all the schools community students in your district, your region. But then we talk so much about teacher well-being and how teacher well-being is so important to allow for student well-being. If the teacher's not in the right space, then the knock-on effect is going to happen. So to build that school culture, it's the two, teacher and student, and you did that virtually, which is fantastic because a lot of people sense that disconnection. So great use.
It was a really big challenge, and then moving from that real sport orientated into our steps challenge, which we ran for 2 years, and found massive engagement where both events contributed a lot of steps. We had 191 million steps in year one in 2020, and then 175, I think I've got here, million steps in year two with a few more schools involved. But that event wasn't just about the kids getting out there and chalking up some steps. It was also about school staff. There was a school staff division, little competition they could enter where they could track, but then also family and friends. And what was really good about that one was 30% of the entries in the entire event were family and friends from the entire event. And we were getting family and friends from overseas, interstate, connecting, because it's all about connecting with your family, connecting with people who mean most to you to help build that well-being and welfare. So we had people from the United States, New Zealand, Fiji, India, the UK, France, South Africa. Wow. We had a couple from Brazil. Grandparents were on holiday. They were stuck over there, so they were walking around in Brazil.
That was brilliant. Talking the world, not the region.
It was great because they could just log in on and enter on part of their grandchild, their niece, nephew, son or daughter's or friend's child's school and add those steps in. It was a real good way for parents to connect with their own social support, the children to connect with their parents and family and friends, and then the staff also to get their family and friends involved before we came back into it as well.
That's awesome. I think what we've just shown here, and hopefully we've presented this as ACHPER Victoria, and having the fantastic teachers in our community share the tips and tricks and share what's actually happening in schools, because you guys are doing that great work and sharing it with us, which is fantastic. But I think we've taken away maybe this sense that technology can be quite scary and we don't feel competent to use it or confident. And I think the last few years has really developed that capacity for us to get used to using it and feel confident, but now bring it into our PE programs really purposefully and meaningfully to engage and really think about how we can increase physical activity levels, how we can educate as well in our PE programs, and how that in itself is really powerful for our own well-being. Thank you, Daniel. So much work went into all of that during the last few years, and I think it's a tool that you've now got and you can build on. And I think you've kind of led the way there with what other people might want to do if they want to run an event in their region and they can't all be together, then let's do it online, because that's just going to increase well-being and physical activity. So thank you for sharing.
or all three presentations gave a lot to this space. And I think the key message that we need to sort of take away is the fact that kids are going to be on screens. They want to be on screens. That's their life. That's how they've been raised. And using that as a positive tool to help keep them active, I think is, is beneficial.
And finally, I think from a teaching perspective, I think it's sort of, Joe, we're moving through, like you sort of said, it's like we don't have to be worried about it or afraid of it or anything. What's more interesting is like when Daniel and Jess and Andy, when they bring their practice, like you bring a teacher's knowledge of learning design and planning and their students, and you create something like that's what's amazing about it. It's more than just, oh, I can use a computer now. It's like, wow, look what we can do, because we're teachers and we think in really innovative, creative ways. Love it.